Hello, greetings, and good day to everybody. I am Professor Jun Cajigal, and in this video, we will study the Earth's hydrosphere. So before we go into the details of the Earth's hydrosphere, please like and share this online lecture so that we could reach more people, especially the students out there, because studying the Earth's hydrosphere is very important. Now, the major importance of the hydrosphere is that water sustains various life forms and plays an important role in ecosystems and also regulating the Earth's atmosphere. The hydrosphere covers all water present on the Earth's surface. So what are we waiting for? And let us now go into the details of the Earth's hydrosphere. So join me as we study the Earth's hydrosphere. Hello and good day to everybody. Now in this video, we will study the Earth's hydrosphere. What is the Earth's hydrosphere and how does it influence the environment? Now, when we speak of the Earth's hydrosphere consists of the Earth's water resources such as the oceans, lakes, rivers, streams, underground water, and including glaciers. And did you know that 97.5% of the Earth is salt water, that is our oceans and seas, and only 2.5% of the Earth's water is fresh water. So isn't that fascinating indeed? Now let's take a look at the following pie charts. So you will notice that almost 97% of our total water resources makes up our oceans and seas, and about 2.5% is fresh water. Now our freshwater resources includes polar ice and groundwater, and other sources of water includes the following. We have ice and snow, lakes, soil moisture, atmospheric water, marshes, rivers, and biological water. So that makes up our Earth's hydrosphere. Now before we study our oceans and seas, let's take a look at the 2.5% of fresh water. Now most of the fresh water is from our inland water resources or inland waters. Now when we speak of inland waters, these are the fresh water resources found on the continents like our rivers, lakes, and underground water. So that makes up our inland waters, our rivers, lakes, and that includes also underground water. Now, what about that almost 97% of our water resources that includes our oceans and seas? Now, there are 5 major oceans, and that includes the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and the Southern Ocean or the Antarctic Ocean. And in our study of the oceans and seas, we consider the following factors, and that includes temperature and salinity. And also, it is vital in our study of the oceans that we map the ocean floor. Now, mapping the ocean floor is vital in our study of our oceans and seas. The topography of the ocean floor is as diverse as that of the continents, and the measurement of the ocean depths is what we call bathymetry. Bathymetry is the measurement of the ocean depths and the charting of the shape or topography of the ocean floor. And today's technology in mapping the ocean floor includes sonar, satellites, and submersibles. And these technological innovations allow scientists to study the ocean floor in a more efficient and precise manner than ever before. Now, one of the earliest technological breakthroughs in the study of the ocean floor was the invention of the sonar, which was actually an offshoot of the technology during World War II. Now, the word sonar actually is an acronym which stands for sound, navigation, and ranging, or sonar. And it is also referred to as echo sounding. In fact, this technology was used in the submarines of World War II, and this was used by Harry Hess in mapping the ocean floor after World War II, which led to the development of the theory of plate tectonics. Now, sonar works by transmitting sound waves towards the ocean bottom. Now, let's take a look at this diagram and let us examine how sonar works. Now, sonar again is the acronym for sound, navigation, and ranging. And sonar works on the principle of an echo. Sonar is comprised of a transducer that emits high-frequency sound waves. These high-frequency sound waves are also known as pings, and when the sound waves strikes an object or hits the ocean floor at a certain distance in its path in the ocean, the propagating sound waves are then reflected back. This reflected sound wave is also known as an echo. Now, the transducer, that's the device that helps convert a particular form of energy into readable signals, then captures the reflected sound wave, which helps to determine the location of that object, and it also determines what is at the bottom of the ocean floor. So that's how sonar works. So isn't that fascinating indeed? Now, another technological breakthrough in mapping the ocean floor is the use of satellite technology. Now, satellites are able to measure small differences by bouncing microwaves off the ocean surface. Now, using this new technology, scientists, oceanographers have discovered that the ocean surface is not perfectly flat. Differences in the height of the ocean surface are caused by ocean floor features. So that's the use of satellite technology in mapping the ocean floor. And lastly, in the exploration of the ocean floor, scientists, oceanographers can make use of submersibles. Submersibles are actually small underwater craft, much like that of a submarine, but this underwater craft is used for deep sea research. And the best example of a submersible was the Trieste, piloted by Lieutenant Don Walsh and Auguste Piccard. And did you know that the Trieste went down into the Challenger Deep near the Marianas Trench? So isn't that fascinating indeed? And today, many submersibles are unmanned and operated remotely by computers. These remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, can remain underwater for long periods. So this is an example of a submersible, and again, the best example of that was the Trieste, which went down into the Challenger Deep near the Marianas Trench. So before we continue, let's watch this video about submersibles. Alright, let's watch this!
Scientific research ship Baseline Explorer. We're just off the coast of Bermuda in the North Atlantic Ocean. 775 miles from New York, 1,051 miles from Florida, 3,237 miles from Cornwall. I'm Greg Foote, I'm the onboard science reporter, and today I'm getting the chance to dive down into the deep ocean in a submersible called Nomad.
I'm excited. Yeah, I've been waiting a very long time for this, so let's get down there. Hello, sir. Can I come in? Oh, it is a bit small, isn't it? All right. See you topside. Yeah, I think we're ready to slide you into position. Okay. Oh, we're flying. Okay, let's turn this on. On that side, is it? We're in.
I guess we're ready to go then.
Yeah, good, thank you. Oh, it's so good to be in here. I've been waiting for this for such a long
Fantastic.
time.
So they're starting to release straps now. Roger that, doing a thruster. So I'm going to test my thrusters.
There's Kenny. Oh look, that's my first glimpse
of underwater.
That is my first glimpse of the underwater.
You're off the hook. Good luck on your journey to the deep.
Roger that. Here we go.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Okay, so we're well clear.
So we're positively buoyant right now, aren't we?
Yep. Inside the big gold tanks that you look on the side here, those are our main ballast tanks. So they're full of air, and they're keeping us right up out of the water. And then in behind us, we have what's called a variable ballast tank, and that's what we use to fine adjust our trim on the bottom.
So excited. so excited.
Topside is Nomad.
Topside, go ahead.
Yeah, my hatch is secure, life support is running. Pre-dive safety briefing has been completed. We're looking for permission just to open our vents and just get out of this heat.
Copy, hatch secure, life support systems on and running, safety briefing complete. You're clear to vent and dip down to liquid.
Roger that, opening vents now.
Okay, so tell me what happens as we open the vents.
So you can see the air starting to come out there.
Yep.
Right? And it's going to tip forward, and then it's going to roll back in a minute. So that's our start.
That's quite a scary feeling, actually, isn't it?
Yep.
Is that a little jellyfish?
Yep.
Just there?
Yep, little jelly.
Nomad, Nemo.
Yeah, go ahead, Nemo.
Yeah, I'm off your port side, heading your way. You want to come this direction a little bit?
Roger that, turn around.
Top side, Nemo.
Okay, there.
Go ahead.
Ah, yes.
Our hatch is secure, our life support systems are on and running. Our safety briefing has been complete. Visual on Nomad, request permission to open vents and that. Both subs have permission to dive. Nemo copies, venting.
No bad copy, heading down.
Down we go.
Gonna hear a little bit of air release. Can hear it again.
Wow.
We're on our way.
It is so beautifully smooth, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Get away from the wave action. There we go.
So you can already see at just 15 feet down that it gets a lot bluer the deeper you go, and that's because the sunlight that's coming in is getting absorbed and scattered by all the water around us. And actually the red gets absorbed and scattered first, which means it just gets bluer and bluer and bluer on the way down to the depths.
Topside, this is Nomad. My depth is 24 feet, my heading is 240, my life support is okay, and my vents are secure.
So we just hover here for a little bit.
No,
waiting.
we're still going down.
Oh, we're going down?
Yeah.
You just can't tell at all?
No. So we're sinking.
Is that a co-pilot job, just to clean the windows?
Absolutely.
I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, there they are.
That is a phenomenal sight. It's like they're flying.
They are.
Isn't it?
Yep.
Whoa! Yeah, hi guys, we see you.
There he goes, look at him spin. I think it's spin fast.
Wow.
Very maneuverable.
You just giving them a little pirouette, are you, Calvin?
Give them a little spin, a little dance.
The ocean is the planet's beating heart. It produces a lot of the oxygen that life needs to breathe. It's home to so much fish that feeds so much of the world. And also it drives the temperature of the planet as well. And just like measuring the pulse to get a sense of the health of the body, we can measure the ocean currents down here in the deep oceans to get a sense of the health of the whole planet and of course the deep ocean. And that is what Necton is doing. Necton's scientific mission is the XL Captain Deep Ocean Survey. And right now I am 565 foot down in this incredible submersible with Kelvin doing just that. So we've now dropped below 200 meters deep, and that means that we've left the sunlight layer, which is known as the epipelagic zone, and we've dropped down into the twilight area, or the mesopelagic zone. And right here it is really dark because all the light, the sunlight, has been scattered and absorbed, and it means it's very dark and very eerie and very alien. But there is still some light here, just it's very, very faint. And if we were to go down below 1,000 meters, we would then go right down deep, down into total darkness, right down into the midnight zone. Oh my word, what's that?
That's the wall right there.
Oh my word, this is phenomenal. So we've made it to our depth. We're at 250 meters, and it's like a wall that's just suddenly appeared in front of us. So we're in this field of wire corals, and there's a few little fish dancing around as well, and we can see some other kind of sprouting corals on the rock. I mean, that's not the scientific name because I don't really know what it is,
Yeah.
but so when we're up on the ship at sea level, we say that the pressure is 1 atmosphere, and that is essentially the amount of pressure pushing down on top of us from the whole of the atmosphere, all of that air pushing down on our shoulders. Now it's actually quite a lot, but we never stop and think about it because we've grown up with it, we've evolved to deal with it. But as you dive deeper and deeper into the water, with all of that water on top of you, that starts pushing down on you, and that's why the pressure increases. And actually it goes up by 1 atmosphere every 10 meters. So we're at 820 feet now.
Or we could say 25 atmospheres because we're at 250 meters.
Which is easily the same as having a jumbo jet or a few of them kind of on top of the sub right now. I find one enough.
One is enough?
Sometimes. I'm guessing it actually wouldn't be possible to open that at all.
No. There's no way you could push that hatch open.
Not a chance.
I'm not going to do it, but I could actually undog it. Nothing would happen.
You don't need to do that.
I won't do it.
I'm going to trust the science.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me about this incredible machine. How can it survive those massive pressures?
Well, we're in a perfect sphere. So this is an acrylic sphere, and it is built to handle that pressure. So if it was square, the sides would push in, but because it's a perfect sphere, it doesn't crush. It pushes in on itself and actually gets quite strong.
Amazing bit of tech. These Triton submersibles are fantastic. It's home for you. It's your office.
It is my office.
Yeah. What an office.
I have the best office.
Oh, you really do.
Yeah. And the part that I like about it the best is that we can come down and spend 2 or 3 hours down here, go straight back to the surface, get out, and have a nice cool drink.
Whereas our technical divers, who are also part of the Necton mission, those guys are absolutely amazing, global underwater explorers. They are diving for 5-6 hours a day, and their decompression, their deco can be hanging at like less than 10 meters below the surface for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Give us a call.
Sure.
Go ahead, Nemo. This is Nomad. Okay, they've seen a shark sighting.
What?
There's a shark somewhere around here. I can't see it.
I just saw something. Oh, what's? I just thought I saw a shadow.
Ah, it's a little group of fish up there. But no shark up here.
No shark.
Son of a gun. Bummer. Side.
Oh, moray eel.
Oh, moray eel. Green moray.
Check that out, look, a green moray eel. This far down, that's amazing. Wow. You've probably heard that we've only mapped 5% of the ocean floor. That's actually not right. We have actually mapped 100% of the ocean's floor, but to a resolution of 5 kilometers. So you're not going to see much detail at all. It's like a really grainy image. But actually, thanks to missions like the Necton mission and some clever bits of trickery where satellites can look down at the ocean and using maths can work out the local shifts in gravity, we've actually mapped about 10 to 15% of the ocean floor to a resolution of about 100 meters. However, saying all that, we have only ever taken samples of 0.0001% of the whole of the ocean floor. So, it is very much still one of the most unexplored areas of our planet. And that is exactly why the Nectar mission is here. That is exactly why we are doing the Exoplatinum Deep Ocean Survey. And that is why we are down at 250 meters underneath that surface of the ocean, looking out across this alien-looking landscape. Alright, we're going up. So Nemo's just taking a look at a couple of crevices in this wall here that we're on the side of. We're right on the side of this seamount that just drops right up. So we're just coming up to the top of the seamount, the top of this underwater mountain that we've been on the side of for the last 2.5 hours.
Topside, topside. This is Nomad. Cleared the top of the wall at 250 feet. Continuing our ascent. Topside, topside. This is Nomad. My depth is 50 feet, 50 feet. Looking for final clearance to the surface. Roger that. Here I come.
This is incredible. It's just got brighter and brighter and brighter, and I can just see the surface just glistening above us like this blanket almost above us, and we're about to break through. Oh!
Here we go.
Here we go, here we go, here we go. Whoa! Oh, that was absolutely phenomenal. And here come the guys. Can I just say, Kelvin, thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
That was just... I will never forget that.
My pleasure.
Absolutely amazing.
It's my job. I love it.
Isn't that fascinating about using those available technologies in mapping the ocean floor? Now, other factors that we consider in the study of our oceans includes temperature and salinity. Now, when we speak of ocean temperature, we consider the following such as depth, season, and latitude. Now, let us zoom in on that first factor that determines the ocean temperature or depth. Now, the temperature of the ocean water varies with depth. In the ocean, solar energy is reflected in the upper surface or rapidly absorbed with depth, meaning that the deeper into the ocean you descend, the less sunlight there is. This results in less warming of the water. Therefore, the deep ocean that is below about 200 meters is cold, with an average temperature of only 4 degrees Celsius. cold water is also more dense, and as a result, heavier water is below than warm water. The colder water sinks below the warm water at the surface, which contributes to the coldness of the deep ocean. Now, to help you visualize that statement, let's take a look at this diagram showing the temperature profile of our oceans in relation to depth. Now, water is warmest at the surface, and this is what we call the epipelagic zone or the sunlight zone, and that is warmed by the sun. Now, since the surface water is warmer, it is also less dense than the deep water. So, it remains at the surface where it can be warmed even more. Now, the temperature is fairly constant in the upper 100 to 200 meters, and this is what we call as the mixed layer. Now, the mixed layer results from surface winds, waves, and currents that mix the upper water and distributes the heat throughout this layer. Now, below the mixed layer, there is a rapid decline in temperature over a fairly narrow increase in depth, as you could see in our diagram. This is called the thermocline. Now, below the thermocline is the deep ocean temperature, which is fairly constant to about 2 degrees Celsius, continuing down to the bottom. There is little temperature change in the deep ocean as it is far removed from significant heat sources, and this makes it one of the most thermally stable regions on the planet. So isn't that fascinating indeed? So that's it. Now, below the epipelagic zone or the mixed layer, you will notice in our diagram that there is a decrease in temperature of the water as we go deeper. And this is what we call as the thermocline. Now, the thermocline is the transition layer between the warmer mixed water at the ocean surface and the cooler deep water below. So that's the transition zone or the thermocline between the mixed layer, surface layer, and the deep zone. Now, the deep zone, sunlight never reaches this layer, and temperatures are just a few degrees above freezing, between 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. And since the water is cold, there is constant high density of the water. Now, another factor that determines the temperature of our oceans and seas would be the seasons. Now, it is obvious that ocean warms slightly during summer and cools slightly during winter. Now, the changes in temperature are less pronounced than on the land because water loses or gains heat much more slowly as compared to the land. And lastly, another factor that determines the temperature of our oceans and seas is latitude. Now, at low latitudes near the equator, direct overhead sunlight received all year warms surface waters. Now, at high latitudes or near the poles, ocean waters receive less sunlight. The poles receives only 40% of the heat than the equator does. These variations in solar energy mean that the ocean surface vary in temperature from a warm 30 degrees Celsius in the tropics or near the equator to a very cold -2 degrees Celsius near the poles. Alright, so before we continue, let's watch this video about ocean temperature. Alright, so let's watch this.
We're going to be talking about temperature variations with depth in our oceans. Now, the temperature variations that we see, these profiles, we see 3 different profiles, and they're all dependent on where you are located in the oceans, if you're in the low latitudes by the equator, if you're in our temperate zones, or if you're in our polar zones. And that's because the temperature variations that we see are all at the surface and are dependent upon those sea surface temperatures. So when we start to draw these out, we're going to draw a nice profile, and I'm going to put all 3 on the same scale so we can watch how that goes. So temperature is going to be on the top, and it will be in degrees Celsius. And we're going to go from 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. Okay, and then our depth will be on our vertical axis in meters from 0, 2,000, 3,000. Okay. So the first place we're going to start and look at are going to be our polar areas. So the water in our polar regions are very cold. So if we think about the Earth and in the seasonal variation, as the Earth is orbiting around the sun, in the winter months, this area goes through periods of darkness. In the summer months, we're still kind of getting some sunlight, but it's not a lot to like warm everything up. So these are very cold areas. And we start to see our polar profile for our seawater. Looks something like this. So in the poles, let's see, I'll write this here. Our polar area, we have cold water from the surface down to depth. So there's very little change in our polar regions. So these are places where there is no obvious thermocline. Okay, and the water is cold from the top to the bottom. Down at depth, the temperatures we're looking at, you can think kind of 3 degrees Celsius, but deep water can range from anywhere from -1 to 3 degrees Celsius. So it's very cold down at depth as we get down there. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is the complete opposite, the extreme, which is going to be our tropical zone. And these are all converging at the same place. So this is our tropics, okay, or our low latitudes. And what we see here is that we have this really warm surface layer at the top. And then there's a zone towards the bottom, kind of right through here, where we have this rapid change in temperature with depth. So this has a very distinct thermocline. But the thermocline is low or deep. And when you cross into this transition, it's going to go from being very warm surface water to very cold, deeper water. So it's a very distinct transition, and it's much deeper down. All right, and that's this warm uniform layer is very nice, very tropical, and it's what we think when we think of our tropical areas. Now our temperate latitudes are a little bit different. They're kind of between the two, and they're a place where we actually do see some seasonal variation. So I'll just draw an easy profile, but this kind of comes down, and again, they're all converging. So this is going to be our temperate. Our temperate latitudes. Okay, so these are places where we have seasonal variation. We have warmer water at the surface, but our thermocline, so this zone where we see this rapid change, it's much larger. So it has the thermocline starts more shallowly and it continues at a deeper depth. And we're going to see some seasonal variation. So the sea surface temperatures, because we're at these temperate latitudes and we get seasonal variation, it's going to change. And in the winter months, the thermocline will be less pronounced. and it's going to be more pronounced in the summer months. And that's because in those summer months we get more of that incoming solar radiation. It leads to warmer sea surface temperatures, so it's going to vary, and that's what this dash is. And the thermocline in this area is thicker, it's a wider zone with the ocean. So those are the three profiles. You can see that overall they all converge down to really cold, deep water. This is all happening pretty, like the warmest areas in our oceans aren't super deep, so most of our seawater is very, very cold. And what's interesting, if we look at the oceans, the average ocean temperature of all the water is 3.9 degrees Celsius, which is cold. And this deep cold water, or this deeper water that's very cold, is bringing down this average temperature. So it takes away that really warm surface tropical water, because there's not as much of it as there is in our deeper ocean. All right, so that's a big thing with temperature variations at depth. The one thing you want to remember is our thermocline. That's a good term to have. So the thermocline is a zone of rapidly changing temperature with depth. Okay, so that would be the one term you want to take from this. And then just remember, in our polar areas, we don't see much change, so there's no obvious thermocline. In our tropics, we see a very significant change, and it's a smaller zone. So it's a smaller zone, but it's deep. But it does have a transition. And then our temperate areas, we do see seasonal variations in our thermocline, and it's going to be a much wider zone where we see that transition in temperature. I hope this helps you better understand how temperature varies with depth in our...
Alright, so I hope you have learned a lot about ocean temperature. Now at this point, let us now study the different ocean floor features, and we will start with the definition of what continental margin is. Now, a continental margin basically is the zone of transition between a continent and the adjacent ocean basin floor. Now, the continental margin is composed of the following. So, we have the continental shelf, continental slope, and continental rise. So, that makes up the so-called continental margin. Now, let's define what a continental shelf is. Now, when we speak of continental shelf, a continental shelf is the gently sloping submerged surface extending from the shoreline. And continental shelves contain important mineral deposits, large reservoir of oil and natural gas, and huge sand and gravel deposits. Now, to help you visualize what the continental shelf is, let's take a look at this diagram. So, the continental shelf typically extends from the coast to depths of about 100 to 200 meters. That's about 300 to 600 feet. And it is gently inclined seaward at an average slope of about 0.1 degrees. And in nearly all instances, it ends at its seaward edge with an abrupt drop, as you could see in our diagram, and that's what we call as the shelf break. And below this lies the continental slope, which is a much steeper zone that usually merges with a section of the ocean floor called the continental rise. So the continental shelf ends with the shelf break. Then beyond the shelf break, there is a sudden drop called the continental slope. The continental slope is the steep gradient that leads to the deep ocean floor and marks the seaward edge of the continental shelf. Then, from the slope, there is a gently sloping region at the base of it called the continental rise. So the continental rise, as I mentioned earlier, is the gently sloping surface at the base of the continental slope. And beyond the continental rise is the ocean floor basin. The ocean floor basin is that area of the deep ocean floor between the continental margin and the oceanic ridge. And what do we find in the ocean floor basin? So we find the so-called deep ocean trenches. Deep ocean trenches form at the sides of plate convergence when one moving plate descends beneath the other and plunges back into the mantle, and this is what we call the subduction zone. So to put it simply, oceanic trenches form when two tectonic plates collide, and this is what we call a convergent boundary. Convergent boundaries form when two tectonic plates collide. Now, in this example, we have a continental plate colliding with an oceanic plate. Now, in this case, the oceanic plate is subducted down, or it is forced down into the mantle. And the convergence of these tectonic plates will form an oceanic trench. And did you know that the Marianas Trench is the deepest trench in the world? And part of the Marianas Trench is the so-called Challenger Deep. The Challenger Deep is the deepest part of the Marianas Trench and the lowest part of the Earth. The Challenger Deep is the lowest elevation on the Earth's crust at about 11,035 meters deep, or that's about 26,000 feet deep below sea level. And with that depth, you can actually fit Mount Everest in the Marianas Trench, and still there would be a mile of water left above it. So isn't that fascinating? And the Trieste, which is a submersible, was the first to reach the Marianas Trench, the Challenger Deep, with pilots Lieutenant Don Walsh and Auguste Piccard. So that's the Trieste, which is a submersible, and the Trieste was the first to reach the Challenger Deep, which is part of the Marianas Trench. So before we continue with our discussion of the different ocean floor features, let's watch this video about that historic dive of the Trieste at the Challenger Deep, which is part of the Marianas Trench. Alright, let's watch this!
In 1960, two men dared to go down a total of 7 miles deep to the deepest depths of the vastly unexplored ocean in a submarine. The Trieste submarine was almost designed as a gasoline-filled balloon, and at the time was a huge feat of engineering. The men were travelling to a place known as the Mariana Trench, a place so deep that even light can't penetrate to such depths. The Mariana Trench is as far away as you can get from the surface of the planet while still being on it. The team of engineers spent a long time testing the vessel, going deeper down until they encountered a challenge, then fixing the problem and repeating the process until they had the submarine working seamlessly. By 1959, they managed to get the submarine down to 18,000 feet, which was a new world record, and then in January they made it to 24,000 feet. To accurately map the depths of the ocean, they had to use explosives on the water and measure the echo. On January 23, 1960, Lieutenant John Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard were ready to go. Although being able to withstand such depths, the Trieste was extremely fragile, like an underwater balloon, so they had to be extremely careful when manoeuvring it into the spot they needed to be in. The seas were rough and there were sharks hovering around their vicinity, so they had to make a tough decision on whether it was safe enough to do it on that day, and even Piccard wasn't sure if he wanted to attempt the dive. However, the longer they waited, the more chance of something going wrong, so they decided to go ahead. The inside of where the men would sit was around the temperature of a refrigerator, and also not much larger than one, so you can only imagine how claustrophobic you would be. So they began their descent. At around 1,000 meters, they had reached a point where no sunlight could. The pressure here is greater than if you were standing on the surface of Venus. 4,000 meters, otherwise known as the Abyssal Zone, home to some of the most amazing creatures that roam the Earth. Apparently, as they descended, they could see flames or sparkling bioluminescent creatures that inhabit the deepest parts of the ocean, and also frighteningly, they could hear the sounds of the pressure on the submarine. At 6,000 meters, the water temperature is utterly freezing. At 9,000 meters, they made it as deep as how high commercial airliners fly, and at these depths, the pressure is immense. Suddenly, at around 31,000 feet deep, they hear a loud crack. Unknowing to the men, the window had just cracked, and of course the crew feared that water would leak into the vessel, because if the window went, the men would be crushed into a kind of pink hash as a result of the extreme pressures. However, everything was working, so they continued going on even deeper. 10,500 meters deep, and they release a steel shot ballast, which works to slow the speed of the descent. Finally, after descending for 5.5 hours, the Trieste comes to a halt at Challenger Deep. Whilst at the bottom of the ocean, one of the things they wanted to discover was if there was any life at such depths. However, this was quickly answered when they saw a flatfish swim across the bottom of the ocean floor. After this, they began their ascent back to the surface. This amazing feat of human endeavour stood as the only time man had gone down to such depths, until the 26th of January 2012, when James Cameron did a solo mission to the Mariana Trench. Although the only reason he managed to do so was as a result of the amazing bravery of Pickard and Lieutenant John Don Walsh many years earlier.
Now that's really fascinating about that historic dive of the submersible Trieste with pilots Lieutenant Don Walsh and Auguste Pickard at the Challenger Deep, which is part of the Marianas Trench. Now, to continue with our discussion of the different ocean floor features, we also have the following. So we have the so-called abyssal plain or abyss. Now, when we speak of abyssal plain or abyss, this is a very level area of the deep ocean floor, usually lying at the foot of the continental rise. And in the abyssal plain or the abyss, the sediments that make up the abyssal plains are carried there by turbidity currents or are deposited as suspended sediments that settles out. And also in the ocean floor, we would find seamounts and guyots. A seamount basically is an isolated volcanic peak that rises at least 1,000 meters above the deep ocean floor. And a guyot is an eroded submerged seamount. Now, to help you visualize what seamounts and guyots are, basically seamounts are underwater or submerged mountains, while guyots are flat-topped submerged mountains or seamounts that have sank into the deeper waters where carbonate material does not accumulate. Also, in the ocean floor basin, we would find mid-oceanic ridges. Now, a mid-oceanic ridge is found near the center of most ocean basins. It is an interconnected system of underwater mountains that have developed on newly formed oceanic crust. So basically, a mid-oceanic ridge is an underwater mountain range. And the most famous of the mid-oceanic ridge is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Now, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, as we have learned before, is actually a divergent plate boundary. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a divergent plate boundary located along the floor of the Atlantic Ocean and part of the longest mountain range in the world in the North Atlantic. This ridge separates the North American plate from the Eurasian plate and the African plate, north and south of the Azores Triple Junction respectively in the South Atlantic. It separates the African and the South American plates. So isn't that fascinating about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge? And lastly, in the deep ocean floor, we would find hydrothermal vents. Hydrothermal vents form along oceanic ridges. These are zones where mineral-rich water heated by hot, newly formed oceanic crust escapes through cracks in the oceanic crust into the surrounding waters. And sometimes we call them as black smokers, as you could see in this photo of a hydrothermal vent. Now, you might have the impression that the floor of the deep ocean is almost devoid of life because little food can be found there. But around hydrothermal vents, life is abundant because food is abundant. Now, the hot mineral-rich fluids supply nutrient chemicals, and specialized bacteria microorganisms called chemosynthetic bacteria actually eat these chemicals, and they form the base of the food chain for a diverse community of organisms around these hydrothermal vents. These hydrothermal vents are the only places on Earth where ultimate source of energy is not sunlight, but the inorganic Earth itself. So isn't that fascinating about life in the hydrothermal vents? So before we continue with the last segment of this online lecture on the Earth's hydrosphere, let's watch this short video about the importance of the hydrothermal vents in our deep oceans. Alright, let's watch this!
Hydrothermal vents. The deep sea represents one of the last remaining unexplored frontiers on the planet, covering 65% of the Earth's surface. The discovery of hydrothermal vents in 1977 revolutionized our understanding of life. But this miraculous ecosystem could vanish before we have the opportunity to fully understand it. Hydrothermal vents occur in regions where Earth's tectonic plates are moving apart, with active vents covering an area of only 50 kilometers squared. Vents form towering chimneys, reaching heights of up to 12 meters, and are known as either white or black smokers, depending on the minerals in their plumes. On the seafloor where vents are found, sunlight is a distant memory, and water temperatures can reach up to 400 degrees Celsius. But miraculously, life thrives here. The sheer biomass at hydrothermal vents can match that of tropical rainforests, and many species are unique to this ecosystem. Chemosynthetic bacteria form the base of the food web, creating energy from mineral deposits rather than sunlight. Giant tube worms, the fastest growing marine invertebrate, are the pioneers of this ecosystem. Yeti crabs, mussels, and shrimps thrive in bustling communities. Sharks patrol the waters surrounding vents, and species such as octopus and skates use the warmer temperatures to incubate their eggs. These vents play a key role in ocean chemistry, bringing heat and nutrients to the depths of the ocean. The species found in this environment have been groundbreaking for medical science and are used to tackle cancer, heart disease, and asthma. A microbe found in these structures has been even used in rapid COVID-19 tests. Despite less than 5% of the seafloor having been explored, the deep sea faces an uncertain future. Deep sea oil and gas extraction is already underway and is expected to expand. companies are also looking to the deep sea to meet rising demand for metals used in technology, like mobile phones and renewable energy. Areas of the seafloor containing metal-rich deposits have already been licensed for exploration. Commercial attention is focused on the abyssal plains, which contain manganese nodules, but hydrothermal vents could be next on the agenda. Not only will removal of materials destroy crucial habitats, the disturbance of sediment from drilling and mining activities could smother vulnerable organisms. It could take decades for the ecosystem to recover from this. The depths of the ocean could hold millions of species that are yet to be discovered. Further research is vital in determining how these organisms might be affected by deep sea activities. In an effort to protect this unique ecosystem, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition is calling for a temporary suspension of all mining activities. We need further protection for the deep sea and tougher regulation by the International Seabed Authority, who oversee deep sea mining. You can help protect the deep sea by taking care of your mobile phone and laptop, choosing refurbished items instead of new, and ensuring they are properly recycled. You can also support the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition by signing the petitions on their website, and you can find and contact your government to ask for a suspension on deep sea mining.
Now, isn't that fascinating about hydrothermal vents and the existence of ecosystems along hydrothermal vents? Now, at this point, we will now proceed with the last segment of our online lecture on the Earth's hydrosphere. We shall now study life in our oceans and seas. Now, marine organisms are actually classified according to where they live and how they move. Now, one of the most important marine organisms are the planktons. There are two types of planktons. We have the phytoplanktons and the zooplanktons. Planktons include all organisms, algae, animals, and bacteria that drift with ocean currents. And like what I mentioned, there are two types of planktons. We have the zooplanktons that includes the larvae of animals like corals, and we have the phytoplanktons that are photosynthetic. These phytoplanktons are algal planktons, which form the base of the food chain. They are the most important community of primary producers in our oceans and seas. Now, isn't that fascinating about planktons? Now, actually, the word plankton comes from the Greek word which means wanderer or drifter. An organism is considered plankton if it is carried by ocean tides and currents. And planktons cannot swim well enough to move against these forces. Now, some planktons drift this way for their entire life cycle. Others are only classified as planktons when they are young, but they eventually grow large enough to swim against these ocean tides and currents. Now, planktons are usually microscopic, often less than 1 inch in length, but they also include larger species like some crustaceans and jellyfish. And did you know that there are two major groups of plankton? So we have the so-called phytoplanktons and zooplanktons. Now, phytoplanktons are actually microscopic plants, and they play a huge role in our marine food web. Now, like plants on land, phytoplanktons perform photosynthesis to convert the sun's energy into energy to support them. And they take in carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. Because they need the sun's energy, phytoplanktons are found near the water surface. While on the other hand, zooplanktons include microscopic animals like krill, sea snails, pelagic worms, and the young of larger invertebrates and fish, and weak swimmers like jellyfish. And did you know that most zooplanktons eat phytoplanktons? And most are in turn eaten by larger animals. That's why these planktons, they really play an important role in our marine food web. Now, unlike planktons that cannot swim against ocean tides and currents, nectons on the other hand include all animals capable of moving independently against the ocean currents and tides, and they do that by swimming or other means of propulsion. Alright, so those are nectons that can swim against these ocean tides and currents. And we have bentos. Now when we speak of bentos, these are organisms living on or in the ocean bottom, like those of crabs and starfish. So before we end with this segment on ocean life, let's talk about marine life zones. Now, there are three factors used to divide the ocean into distinct marine life zones. First, we have the availability of sunlight. Second, we have distance from shore and the water depth. Now, in terms of the availability of sunlight, we have two distinct marine life zones. So we have what we call the photic zone, which is actually the upper part of the ocean into which sunlight can still penetrate, and that's about from 0 to 500 feet below sea level. So that is the photic zone where light can still penetrate. Now below 500 feet, light cannot penetrate anymore. So that's darkness, and that's what we call the apophotic zone. So those are the two marine life zones in terms of the availability of sunlight. We have the photic zone where light can still penetrate, and beyond the photic zone there is darkness, and that's what we call the apophotic zone. Now what about the distance from shore? So first we have what we call the intertidal zone. The intertidal zone is the strip of land where the land and ocean meet and overlap, or the zone between high tide and low tide. And beyond the intertidal zone, we have the neritic zone. The neritic zone is the marine life zone that extends from the low tide line out to the continental or the shelf break. And beyond the neritic zone, we have the oceanic zone, is the marine life zone beyond the continental shelf. So that is the marine life zones based on the distance from shore. So again, first we have the intertidal zone where the land and the sea meet. Then beyond the intertidal zone, we have the neritic zone. The neritic zone is defined as the ocean above the edge of the continental shelf, and beyond the neritic zone is the oceanic zone. Alright, so at this point, let's watch this short video about marine life zones. Alright, let's watch this.
The marine life zones consist of two different sub-level zones, the horizontal zone and the vertical zone. Each of these zones have their own sub-level zones as well, each consisting of different plants and animals, and as you get further and deeper, the organisms get weirder and weirder. Many parts of the ocean have yet to be discovered and analyzed fully, but what you're about to see is what we do know about the great ocean. The horizontal zones can be described as the zones that extend from the land and out towards the sea, hence the name horizontal. The horizontal zone is split into two main zones, one being the intertidal zone and the other being the pelagic zone. The intertidal zone is the area in which the sea bottom is waterlogged by the tides for one part of the day and exposed to the air another part of the day. In other words, it's the area we call the seashore. The area above the water at low tide and beneath the water at high tide. The organisms in this area endure many difficult factors due to being engulfed by the sea at one point and exposed to the air at another. Organisms have to endure the physical impacts of the crashing of tides, the sunlight exposure, and desiccation. Not to mention the fact that they must face the risk of predators both in sea and on land. The creatures that call the intertidal zone home include barnacles, chitons, crabs, mussels, snails, and even green algae. These creatures usually either latch themselves onto rocky surfaces or burrow themselves under the sand to endure the crashing tides. The pelagic zone includes all of the vast open waters of the sea that extend from the intertidal zone's low tide area. This zone has two subdivisions recognized, which are the Noretic zone and the oceanic zone. The Noretic zone can be described as a sunlit area that overlies the continental shelf that can reach to a depth of 600 feet. The oceanic zone is the area that extends past the continental shelf, the continental slope, and over the ocean's floor. In this zone, you'll find it still illuminated with sunlight and with more pressure than its Noretic zone brethren. The organisms that you'll find in the pelagic zone are often large ocean fish, such as tuna and sharks, turtles and jellyfish, and even marine mammals such as whales and dolphins. It is the largest marine biome in terms of volume, but often lack in terms of actual marine life population. The vertical zone can be characterized by the expansion of light from the sea surface to its dark depths. It is by the sunlight's expansion and the depth of the ocean that the vertical zone is subdivided. These subdivisions include the photic and aphotic zone. The term photic means light, so really you could call this zone light zone. Sunlight only penetrates the ocean's surface at about 200 meters low. Anything below that is covered in darkness. This area where light does penetrate is called the photic zone. Organisms that can only use photosynthesis are restricted to this area. And since phytoplankton, which are tiny photosynthetic organisms, supply nearly all of the energy and nutrients to the rest of the food web, most other marine organisms live in or at least visit the photic zone. The aphotic zone is everything else that is beneath the photic zone and where the light does not reach and photosynthesis does not occur. This zone makes up the majority of the ocean, but due to its depth and lack of light, it has a relatively small amount of life, in both diversity of type and in number of organisms. The aphotic zone is subdivided by depth into the mesopelagic zone, which is 500 to 3,280 feet, the bathypelagic zone, which is 3,280 to 13,000 feet, the abyssopelagic zone, which is 13,000 to 20,000 feet, and the hadal zone, which is 20,000 to 35,000 feet below the sea's surface. The only forms of light you'll see in this zone are from bioluminescent organisms. Some well-known organisms that call the aphotic zone home include the gulper eel, giant squid, anglerfish, and the vampire squid. Some of the world's ugliest creatures are found in the aphotic zone as well, like the viperfish, lizardfish, and dragonfish. Yet there are sure to be many more undiscovered creatures lying deep within the dark depths of the aphotic zone. From this, we have learned all the zones and subdivisions of the vast oceans of Earth and explored into its darkest depths. There is still way more to be discovered from the ocean we know and love. And as technology advances, so will our exploration into the depths.
Alright, so I guess that's about it for our online lecture on the Earth's hydrosphere. I hope you have learned a lot about our oceans and seas. So again, please like and share this online lecture so that we could reach more students taking life sciences. Alright, this is your lecturer, Professor June Cajigal, saying live long and prosper. Alright, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you on my next video. Bye-bye!